What's up, everyone? Today I'm going to chat a bit more about my process of programming from a macro perspective. So when we talk about programming, we can talk about, mapping out a program throughout a year or mapping your day-to-day exercise selection based on your goals. Today I'm going to have us zoom out and take the lens of, that big macro perspective of programming. How do we lay out what the goals are for each block, and how many blocks do we have to run in order to get someone from A to B? And we're going to do this by talking about needs analysis and establishing sequential mini goals through reverse engineering a plan from the main goal backwards to where they're at. I compare this most to a map, right? When you pull up Google Maps on your phone, you have to put in where you're going from and where you have to go. And inside of that, you'll know, or you'll have to start doing math about how many times you might have to fill your gas tank based on how many miles you're traveling and based on how many miles per gallon the particular car you're taking is, right? We need to understand some of these variables in order to make sure that we get from point A to point B. Now, the needs analysis is a lot about collecting what's at point A and what's at point B. Where are they and how can I get them here? How many stops do we need to make in order to fill up for gas? Do we need to think about taking a different car that has a bit more miles per gallon, a larger tank, a smaller tank? These are all variables that we have to think about, and we don't really consciously think about when we're taking a trip, but things that we've learned and we can understand. So, needs analysis. When talking about an athlete comes to you and you're going to do an assessment, which is going to be a big part of your data collection. But the assessment is going to be knowing where that person is, where their point A is, and knowing that it's not their point A. They've probably traveled before that, right? So you're going to learn about their previous training history. You're going to learn about their previous injury or pain history. You're going to learn about what's worked best for them and what hasn't worked for them at all. That way you know there are these tools that I can use and there are these tools that I might absolutely not be able to use or may have to modify in order to get this person to utilize them in the best way possible or the way that benefits them the most. Move on to data collection, and these are more numbers. These are the previous 1 RMs, 3 RMs, 5 RMs, 8 RMs, 10 RMs that they've hit. If you don't know what RM is rep max. This is where you collect data about their anthropometrics. As much as, we don't want to make excuses, there are some changes we have to make for longer limbed lifters versus longer torsoed lifters. So understanding where that athlete lies will help to set you both up for success when it comes to the exercise selection portion or things that you're going to need to focus on for them to bring up that next letter C, the lowest hanging fruit. We're going to look for their biggest limiting factor that we can address that will have the greatest effect for over here in their end goal. This is where we're going to figure out what buckets we need to prioritize and fill in order to get them to their end game. And the next thing you'll want to collect is time or equipment restraints. A lot of people since COVID have turned to training inside of their homes. Now, most people can't fit all of the equipment that you can fit in a commercial gym in their home. Most people don't have leg extensions or hamstring curls. So what kind of equipment are you constrained to when writing a program for this person? Time constraints is also another big one because most people are not doing this as a full-time job. Most people don't have 2.5 hours to go spend in the gym training. So what is this person's time constraint? Because if I write someone a 2.5 hour workout and they're consistently only getting through an hour and a half of it, that is degrading their confidence. They're not finishing a workout ever. That really takes away from someone's confidence. Like, I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing what I need to do to get to where I need to be. And that can have more of a toll on someone than actually just writing, an hour and a half program as it is. play with rest. And I'll talk more about this from the micro perspective on how we can alter time constraints, but from the big perspective, how many times a week are they training? How long do they want to be at the gym? What are their goals? All of these things matter. This is why we're collecting data from them and collecting data from where they need to go. So what buckets do people need? Now, this isn't a huge extensive list in the middle you'll see here in the green, but these are some general buckets that I look to fill during certain phases of training for people. We have movement technique. So that is, do they need to focus more on their squat movement? Do they need to focus on grooving a pattern? This might include something like tempos so that people can spend more time in the places that they're uncomfortable or don't really have the perception of where their body is in space. Energy systems work. Do they need to build their cardiovascular system so that we can shunt energy and oxygen to the muscles in a bit more of an optimal or effective manner? These are things like, continuous sled pushes. We can do some moderate intensity continuous training like loaded step ups or sled drags. All things like that are going to target the specific energy systems that we need to target in this person. Have they always been a runner? If they've always been a long distance runner, you might need to work a bit more on their ability to produce power in that creatine phosphate system, the CP system, that very first 10 seconds of exercise. Can we get them to be more powerful? Do we need to spend more time with them there, given they were only an endurance athlete and now they're trying to participate in powerlifting, which is completely the opposite end of the spectrum? Okay, tissue tolerance. Was there a previous injury there? Do we need to really focus on building up the tolerance of a specific tissue in the body based on this person's history? For example, they have knee pain with quad dominant movements. Do we need to build their quad tissue tolerance in a range of motion, at a certain intensity, at a certain rep range? These are all questions I'm asking myself and all buckets that I'm looking to fill if I need to. But again, all this information comes from my needs analysis and discussing what or where that athlete is and where they want to be. Next, max strength expression. This is huge in powerlifting, right? Your ability to express strength in one rep is your max strength expression. Strength expression. Can they produce strength in multiple reps? Do they have the ability to repeat it? Hypertrophy or muscle size. Do they need to put on muscle mass? Is there a discrepancy between their quads and their hamstrings, so much so that we should really focus on building up their hamstring size so that they can have a better deadlift? Because cross-sectional area does correlate with strength expression. Strength capacity, or the ability to repeat. So can you take your 2-rep max and repeat it? Probably not. But can you take a percentage of your 2-rep max and make that repeatable 8, 9, 10 times? That's going to fill a bit more into your energy systems work, but it's still something we look to cover. Is the number that you're hitting now repeatable? Can we build capacity within that intensity so that you can then build on that as you progress through a strength block? Movement variability. Do we need to prioritize movement variability, or do we need to prioritize movement specificity? For someone like a powerlifter, if they're in a 12-week block where they are peaking for a meet, and you're not going to be peaking for 12 weeks, but if they're in a 12-week block or 12-week plan for a meet, you are probably not going to be incorporating a whole lot of movement variability. You know exactly what that athlete has in front of them. They have a 1-rep max attempt on their squat. They have a 1-rep max attempt on their bench. They have a 1-rep max attempt on their deadlift. This is not similar to strongman where you don't know, or CrossFit, where you don't know what the event is leading up, so you have to train a bunch of different qualities. Powerlifting is very, you can assume what's coming, right? It's very easy to break down the needs analysis of a powerlifter. So leading into a meet, probably not a whole lot of movement variability. I'm probably going to stick to the specifics: squat, bench, deadlift, all in their competition stance or grip width. Now, after a powerlifting meet, immediately after, most of my athletes see the most movement variability there. That's because we just spent 12 weeks being really, really specific and just drilling you down into squat, bench, and deadlift. Now I want to reverse that a little bit and give those tendons and tissues time to heal. So I'm going to incorporate or prioritize a bit more movement variability. Variations of different movements. Safety bar squats, hack squats, Romanian deadlifts, snatch grip deadlifts, narrow grip bench, right? All of these are a bit more variable from the actual movement that we're looking to, express strength in. So let's say an athlete approaches and wants to compete in powerlifting, but only has experience in 6+ reps, and they only have an 8 rep max. They're a former soccer player with large quads compared to hamstrings. What are our buckets of priorities? So let's talk about the needs analysis of powerlifting, B, where we want to go. And then let's also talk about A, where this person is. They're a soccer player who's probably been a bit more aerobically trained than anaerobically trained. So we're going to probably want to incorporate some sort of energy systems work. Now, this is an example where specifically I would probably move towards that strength capacity, start getting them into being able to repeat their strength. But we're going to need to cross-reference both of these things in order to meet in the middle on where our buckets of priority are for this athlete. So right away, my buckets of priority are certainly going to be hypertrophy of the hamstrings. It's going to be strength expression, and then likely strength capacity, their ability to repeat that strength. And then I would probably want to add in some of that energy systems work for that anaerobic capacity. They'll likely need to also work on movement technique, as it seems like they may not have a very big training age, especially given that they're going to be working in higher intensities. If you've only had an athlete that's worked in 6 to 8, 6 to 10 to 12 to 15 rep ranges and nothing below that, as the weight goes up, we're going to need to address their movement technique. They probably haven't been under a whole lot of high intensity load. So that is going to be something we're going to want to focus on, is movement technique, more specifically in higher intensities or that strength expression. So as you can see, we've almost covered all of these buckets that we want to fill. All right. We've done our needs analysis. We know that we gather information at A, we gather information at B, and that's going to allow us to plan our entire trip in the middle, if we're talking about a map. All right. Next step is to establish the sequential mini goals by reverse engineering a plan from the main goal. So like I said, I'm going to start with B. What do they need to have on this date? So for example, a powerlifter who wants to compete every 6 months, let's say their competitions are on 1-1 and 7-1. Today is 1-2. They just competed yesterday. They did fantastic, right? Their next meet is in 6 months. We know that we have 24 weeks. Now, most athletes average 4-week blocks, but don't marry yourself to that. Just for the sake of simplicity, we're going to keep people at, on average, 4-week blocks. At 24 weeks, this gives us 6 blocks to work with. On meet day, the athlete needs maximal strength expression in the squat, bench, and deadlift. This bucket must be emphasized in the final block. We also will prioritize movement technique in this block as well. So, the month leading into the meet. Meet is on 7-1. Like I said, we're going to reverse engineer this. So, I take from 6-1 to 7-1 is my block right before the meet. That's going to be, let's say, block 6. Our goals here, and in green you'll see our main priorities, and then in pink you'll see kind of those secondary goals. The main priorities for that month right before the 4 weeks, or the block right before the meet, is to peak the athlete. It is to get them in peak shape to be able to express their 1 rep max in the big 3. Second is movement technique. Third priority is going to be hypertrophy or muscle size maintenance. I still want to use some exercises in the range of hypertrophy, and we'll talk more about this in that micro programming video, but I want to prioritize hypertrophy and muscle size because sometimes max strength expression is not going to signal for your body to maintain muscle mass. Now, along with dieting and some specific ranges and adaptations that we target through hypertrophy work, you're going to be able to maintain your muscle size while we are simultaneously pushing your max strength. That's why it's a secondary goal. It's still relevant, and if you are to lose cross-sectional area, you will likely lose strength. So it's still a secondary goal, and it's still important, but it's not quite a priority like max strength expression or movement technique under higher intensities. Okay, so building backwards. We've done block 6. Block 5, from 5-1 to 6-1. Again, building backwards. We're looking to build strength expression. That strength expression will lead into your max strength expression. So we're basically building blocks onto each other in order to yield a goal. And they should be in a very sequential order, meaning that the block before, you build on it, and the block after, you're able to build on what you're doing currently. Okay, so block number 5, strength expression, tissue tolerance. We're about to put a lot of stress on a lot of tissues in that next and final block. We want to be able to build up some tissue tolerance in muscles and tissues that may, start to break down or start to feel a lot of stress, right? Low back, quads, sometimes the shoulders, right? We want to be able to build tissue tolerance in this phase in order to, preemptively avoid any sort of issue that we might run into in that max strength expression. Again, here we're going to have as secondary movement technique. We want to make sure that technique is still pretty dialed in the strength expression block. And we're also going to focus on hypertrophy and muscle size maintenance. Again, not a main focus. We're not looking to have someone put on muscle. We are just using some exercises and a very baseline number of sets in order to maintain muscle mass so that we don't degrade muscle mass and end up going backwards in our strength. Block 4 is 4-1 to 5-1. We're going to focus on tissue tolerance, again, leading into that next block. Some strength capacity. We've likely just built some strength or, hypertrophy, and we want to start getting someone back into strength. So we're going to use a bit higher intensity, but still in a manner that it is repeatable and we can build a nice base to work off of the next block to build that strength expression. Working more in, the strength capacity is more going to be repeatable sets, 4x5s, 5x5s. Your strength expression is probably going to have a top set and drop set work so that you can really focus on output on that top set. So block 4 is also strength capacity and energy systems work, still maintaining that hypertrophy and muscle size, especially because the block that I'm about to talk about is where we are prioritizing hypertrophy and muscle size, right? Hypertrophy, tissue tolerance of any muscles that may have broken down, from the previous meet. Energy systems work is going to be huge here. This is a place you can put it in without taking too much away. And movement technique. Well, I put movement technique in here because this is the phase where we might be reintroducing some of the comp lifts. So we want to make sure that that the athlete is set up for success by giving them a block where they can focus on their movement technique to get back into it so that we can then utilize it for strength capacity and then build upon that. So movement technique is thrown in there right now because the block before it, right here, 1-2 to 3-1, that's 2 months, is going to be where we mainly focus on hypertrophy, movement variability, and energy systems, building the base and targeting the areas that most powerlifters do not target so that we can have more to build off of. Again, sometimes our greatest limiter is something like our energy systems or our ability to pump oxygen to the muscle. If we continue to neglect that, it's going to continue to be our biggest limiter. So we focus on those when we can have movement variability, when we can output a lot in terms of energy systems training and not take away from trying to get more strength out of our training while simultaneously trying to achieve these other things. If we have 6 months, we can build this sequential order to work on these small mini goals that all feed into your large goal, which is increasing your 1RM. Now, just because you increase your 5 rep max doesn't always mean you're going to increase your 1 rep max, but it's a good indicator that, you know, you're building up in strength and that we can now build on that new max that you've encountered. So like I said in here in pink, coming off of a meet is the time to focus on all the buckets we neglect during peak or actual prep for a meet. And like I said before, each block should feed into the next and build off the last. So this is a very sequential decision making that I take in order to make sure that we're covering all of our buckets, but also prioritizing the right buckets when we need to. I drew a little graph over here for y'all of the blocks. So block 1, block 2, block 3, block 4. And you'll see, if I can scroll up, that intensity is green, volume is pink, and variability is orange. So we start block 1 at really high volume and really high variability. We're focusing on building muscle mass, we're focused on tissue tolerance, and we're focused on movement variability. With that, intensity goes really low. Intensity and volume are typically inverse relationship. As one goes up, the other must decrease. So you're going to see these take a bit of an inverse relationship here. Block 2. Volume is pretty similar and variability is also pretty similar. And you will say intensity stays about the same as well. Those 2 months are really about, again, energy systems, hypertrophy, adding more volume, or, you know, just moving in ways that we haven't moved in a while. Block 3, right here, this line, we have intensity growing. We have variability dropping. So we're taking out some of those more variable exercises and maybe replacing them again with movements that we can work on movement technique. Things like tempo squats, things like eccentric deadlifts. Just something where you can start to move weight, but your intensity is a bit more limited, so you're not pushing yourself the same as you would into a peak. Block 4, everything starting to converge a little bit closer, right? We have volume dropping more, we have variability dropping off even more as we're starting to work our way into a peak or, you know, a strength block for a meet. And our intensity is rising, okay? Block 5, we have intensity rising, we have variability dropping way off, and we also have volume dropping off. This is because we're working more on strength expression. In order to work on strength, we have to work in higher intensities. And if we're working at higher intensities, our volume has to inherently go down. Again, this block 5 is about 8 weeks out from a meet, so we are getting very specific. We are limiting our movement variability and increasing our movement specificity. Block 6, you'll see, has the highest intensity, the lowest volume, and the lowest variability. This is that block right here where we're really talking about max strength expression in the big 3 and being very, very specific on movement technique there. Again, utilizing what little bit of volume we have to help maintain our muscle size. All right, so these are my thoughts, and this is how I organize almost everyone's program that I write. I run a needs analysis, I gather where they're from, and I know where they want to go, and I try to find the best path for them based on how big their tank is, based on how many miles per gallon they get, right? How many times can they stop to refill their tank? All of these things matter, and it all comes down to drawing a path backwards from where you want to be to where you are currently, and just addressing those specific variables that we know we'll need to address along the ride. Thank you all for listening. I hope this was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions. Drop them in the comments below. Happy to answer. But I hope this was helpful, and really looking forward to sending you all more of my micro perspective thoughts and systems on programming. Take care. Have a great day, and we'll chat soon.